This week, you began reading Vanessa Panfil's The Gangs All Queer, The Lives of Gay Gang Members. I asked you to begin by looking at the introduction and chapter 2 of the text, which will set the foundation for your group presentations. Since part of your presentation will include providing background information from this week's materials, it's important that you carefully examine the theories and findings in these chapters. Today, I want to briefly go over the presentation structure I sent out earlier to help each group create their own presentation. It's always good to begin your presentation with a title slide. This would include the title of the book, the chapter that you're going to be exploring in detail, as well as the author's name. You'll also want to include the names of all the individuals in your group. After the title slide, most sociological presentations begin with a brief summary of what the audience can expect to hear throughout the next 8 to 15 minutes. For example, the presenters might simply say, "We'll begin this presentation by looking at some of the theoretical models that informed this research, followed by some background information about the context of the community we'll be studying. Then we'll explore the data and methods used in this study and present our key findings. We'll conclude by offering some suggestions for future research." To set the foundation for your chapter, you'll want to speak briefly on current research in the sociology of sexualities. For the purpose of our class projects, you'll want to make connections between the materials in The Gangs All Queer and the various theories and perspectives we've covered throughout the semester. For example, you might find connections between the material in the text and the theory of social constructionism, intersectionality, or queer theory. The key here is to make connections between the text you read for the presentation and the course, generally speaking. Next, you want to address the key contributions of the work as a whole. This is likely connected to the author's key research question. It very broadly states what the work does, what it adds to our understanding of human sexuality, and why it's important. Addressing the theoretical models and literature that help build your case is important in any sociological text, and it's important in any sociological presentation. Therefore, I'd like for you to address it in this project. In this particular text, the author outlines the theory and literature that's informed her research. You can find that in the introduction to the text. You shouldn't spend a lot of time on this slide, but I would like for you to take a slide to briefly address the scholarship the author is adding to with this work. Now you can specifically address your empirical chapter. This often begins with a slide that tells the audience what will be examined in the chapter that will be the core essence of your presentation. Oftentimes, sociological presentations provide the audience with a little bit of background information or context before they delve into the meat of their findings. For example, you might talk a little bit about gang activity in Columbus, Ohio, or the class and family dynamics embedded within the experience of the men in Panfil's study. This shouldn't be a long slide. It simply provides the audience with some additional information on the topic. Just as the literature review and theoretical foundation are important in a sociological presentation, it's also important to provide your audience with the way in which that the study was conducted. Thus, it's important to have a data and methods slide. In this slide, you simply want to explain how the data was collected for the study and by whom. Your key findings are the most important part of your presentation. Here, you want to provide the audience with the central themes of the chapter. You could support each of these points with a quote or an example from the actual text, or you could consider even adding an image to this slide. While many of your other slides will only be several seconds long, the recording for your key findings is likely to be significantly longer. Now that you've presented your key findings, you might look for one or two important themes that relate to your findings as a whole. These are your concluding or takeaway thoughts, and it's a good way to end any sociological presentation. As I've strongly implied throughout the semester, through our 3-2-1 assignments and course discussions, sociological texts often lead us with a number of unanswered questions and places for further exploration. After you present your key findings and conclusions, it's always nice to address these questions and frame them as directions for future research. Here you might consider questions that weren't answered in the chapter that you would like to know more about. Citations are important in any academic discipline, and sociological presentations always have a reference slide. For the purpose of this course, you'll need to include Panfil's text on your reference slide. And depending on what you included in your theory and literature slide, you'll have some additional text. Since the references from the theoretical framing in literature come directly from Panfil's text, I suggest simply using the references she has beginning on page 267 that correspond with what you're outlining on your theory and literature slide. The final slide is just a simple thank you and a place where you can again state your names, your institution, and your contact information.